welcome to the Christian Constitutional Conservative, and today we're going to go ahead and look at MSNBC and their question: are we heading for a civil war if Trump is sentenced to prison? So we'll go ahead and check this out and see what they have to say.
Donald Trump is already facing multiple trials.
Oh, here we go with this guy, the guy that says Trump and DeSantis are dangerous and we should be worried, but let's laugh and have a good time.
Next year, he's staring down 78 felony counts in 3 different jurisdictions, and another indictment of the former president is expected as early as this week in Fulton County, Georgia. Several witnesses, including the state's former Republican lieutenant governor, have now indicated that they have been called to testify before a grand jury on Tuesday. And in Washington, D.C., Jack Smith, the DOJ special counsel, has asked for a trial of Trump over the crucial election case to begin on January the 2nd, less than 5 months from now. So what happens if Trump is convicted and sentenced to prison, especially this side of an election?
So I see that now they're not hiding the fact that Jack Smith is with the DOJ. Before they were trying to separate him from the DOJ, he's independent, all this kind of stuff, and now he's just a part of the DOJ. And yeah, so this is kind of like being in Venezuela or China or things like that, where the political leaders are going after a political opponent.
What will his supporters do? My NBC News colleague Vaughn Hilliard asked one of them at a rally in New Hampshire on Tuesday.
If Donald Trump were to be found guilty by a jury, where do you see this going?
Civil war, because we can't live together, obviously.
Now,
so they base this whole video on what one old lady said. Man, that lady wouldn't even fight in a civil war. I wouldn't even think she has guns, and that's the story here. Oh my word. Okay, anyway.
You might just dismiss that as the rantings of a cultish Trump superfan.
Nah, it's an old lady.
Big talk. This country's nowhere near a civil war. That's hyperbole. So have a listen to Florida GOP Congressman Matt Gaetz speaking alongside Trump himself at the Iowa State Fair yesterday.
I cannot stand these people that are destroying our country, that are opening our borders, that are weaponizing our federal law enforcement against patriotic Americans who love this nation as we should. We are having a great time at the fair. We love standing with you, but we know that only through force do we make any change in a corrupt town like Washington, D.C.
Only by force can we make change in D.C.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of rhetoric that I've heard from the left too. So, okay. But you're not going to mention that because that goes against the narrative.
That's what he said. Still not enough for you?
And even if we did say by force, this is where the whole bootlicking and the whole, if Hasan would have been living in 1775, he probably would have been tarred and feathered.
Then listen also to what Michigan Republican State Representative Matt Maddock, whose wife Mee Shawn, a former co-chair of the Michigan Republican Party and one of the 16 fake electors who was criminally charged last month, listen to what he had to say earlier this month at a GOP fundraiser, per an audio recording obtained by the news site The Messenger.
If the government continues to weaponize these departments against conservatives and the citizens that are the taxpayers, what's going to happen to this country? Someone's going to get so pissed off they're going to shoot someone. That's what's going to happen. Or we're going to have a civil war or some sort of revolution. That's where this is going.
After that audio was released, Maddock issued this statement to The Messenger, writing that he was simply exercising his right to free speech in the privacy of his own home. We've reached out to Maddock ourselves for comment, but have yet to hear back. Now, I don't know about you, but stuff like that sends a chill down my spine. Elected Republicans casually discussing, implicitly threatening civil war, shootings, the use of force. Now, you might say again, that's just talk. Talk is cheap. But it's not just talk. Political violence is not just something abstract or something that might happen at some point in the future. It's happening right now. It has been happening and increasing, especially since the violent insurrection at our nation's capital. A new study from Reuters out this week finds that there have been 213 cases of political violence since January the 6th, 2021, in which at least 39 people have been killed. Quote, the biggest and most sustained increase in political violence since the 1970s. These incidents of political violence began rising in 2016, you'll be shocked to hear, around the time of Trump's first run for the presidency.
Now, does this include the person who was shot by a Republican congressman who was shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter? Is that including that, I wonder? Is it including both right and left political violence? Because the way they're framing it is that this is only one-sided. Notice, look at what's behind you, is the January 6th insurrection. So is Reuters just talking about January 6th, or is Reuters talking about just all political violence of the left or of the right, and then MSNBC is taking it and acting like it's only one-sided?
It's Trump supporters who are pushing the Civil War narrative, and it's largely Trump supporters engaging in the political violence and domestic terrorism.
So I looked up the Reuters, what Reuters had to say, and at the very bottom, they said that there is no clear definition and no legal or government definition of what constitutes political violence. So Reuters, which is left-wing anyway, it could be a little biased and is probably counting what they want to count as political violence. And they can do so at their own discretion. So really, Reuters is not reliable as far as determining what political violence is, because the government and legal system hasn't even determined that. So, that would put a lot of suspicion on what these acts of political violence are all about. All right, so let's go.
In fact, we know that 3 Trump supporters have been killed in clashes with law enforcement on or since 1/6. There was Ashley Babbitt, the woman who was shot and killed by a Capitol police officer during the January 6th riot as she tried to force her way through a barricaded door that was protecting members of the House from that mob.
And actually, it has been shown, I think either Tucker Carlson or someone else has shown, that she was actually not trying to force her way in. She was trying to get out, because these guys here, these men here, have not been identified, but a lot of people suspect that they are either undercover agents, Antifa members, things like that. And she did not like how they were treating the inside of the Capitol, and so she was trying to get away from these dudes here, that they were being very threatening and not behaving very well, behaving very suspiciously.
Babbitt, an Air Force veteran from California, was an ardent Trump supporter. Her social media pages were devoted to celebrating the then president. Since her death, Trump has praised Babbitt, calling her a, quote, innocent, wonderful, incredible woman. Then there was Ricky Schiffer, the man from Ohio who was killed by police after he fired a nail gun at a Cincinnati FBI building shortly after the Bureau executed a search warrant at the ex-president's Mar-a-Lago residence last summer. Schiffer was a prolific poster on Trump's social media site, Truth Social, in support of the former president. In the days after the FBI's search, he posted multiple times about wanting to engage in violence. One post even called for people to arm themselves and be ready for, quote, combat. And then there's Craig Robertson, a Utah man who was shot and killed during an FBI raid earlier this week. On Wednesday morning, after he reportedly pointed a gun at agents, the FBI was attempting to serve Robertson with a search and arrest warrant for posts he allegedly made online threatening to kill President Biden and Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Robertson was a self-described, quote, MAGA Trumper, and was observed during FBI surveillance wearing a hat emblazoned with the word Trump. Now, we can't prove, of course, that Donald Trump inspired these people to commit or threaten to commit acts of violence, but what we do know is that these 3 people echoed Trump's rhetoric and believed they were fighting on his behalf against his enemies in the legislature, in the judiciary, in law enforcement. They were radicalized. And they're not alone. One recent study from Professor Robert Pape at the University of Chicago found that from April the 6th, 2023 to June 26, 2023, Americans agreeing that the use of force is justified to restore Donald Trump to the presidency increased from 4.5% to 7%, or the equivalent of an estimated shift from 12 million to 18 million American adults. In a moment, I'll speak to Professor Barbara F. Walter from the University of California, who is an expert on civil conflict, author of the book How Civil Wars Start. She says we are closer to civil war than any of us would like to believe. So is it any wonder that on Friday, during a hearing regarding a protective order in the DOJ's election interference case against Trump, Judge Tanya Chutkan issued a stark warning to Trump about witness intimidation? Chutkan told the ex-president's attorneys that even, quote, arguably ambiguous statements could be considered an attempt to, quote, intimidate witnesses and would therefore trigger the court to take action.
Now, here's the funny thing about this judge, is that she had posted around January 2020 or 2021 about how she wanted to see Trump arrested. And now she's going to preside over Trump's indictment. Now, take that as you will, but that to me sounds very biased of this judge. She tweeted. There's a tweet out there basically saying that she believes that Trump should be prosecuted, and now she's going to carry out or be the judge during his indictment. But no bias at all.
She's clearly worried, and we all should be. I mean, can you imagine if any other presidential candidate in recent decades, Bush, Obama, Clinton, Romney, Biden, had multiple supporters using their candidate's language, being violent and threatening, getting killed by law enforcement while attempting violent crimes? Those candidates' campaigns would have been over before they began. But with Trump, we shrug. We accept it as just the way things are now. We should not. We cannot. We have to call it out. We have to condemn the violence and the incitement of violence. We have to take steps to prevent it from escalating out of all control. The threat of civil war, of domestic conflict, is no longer hyperbole. And so we just cannot afford to normalize political violence and the threat of political violence in this country just because Donald Trump benefits from it and the Republican Party seems totally fine with it.
All right, so I really didn't say much. I let him say his little spiel to the end. Here's my thoughts. Hasan would have been a great newspaper man for King George III. In 1776. Hasan is not a big fan of the Declaration, would not be a big fan of the Declaration of Independence. That talks about when a long train of abuses and usurpations are being met and are being inflicted on the people by government powers. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish those forms of government who are enslaving them or who are being a menace to them. Our country was founded on the government and government workers being tarred and feathered, of effigies of King George III being hung and burnt. Revolutions are conflicts, armed conflicts against the government. And as I've addressed in even my history streaming, my history channel, as long as both parties are meeting each other on the field of battle, revolutions are okay. Civil wars are okay. fighting for what you believe in is okay. When your rights are being trampled, it's okay to fight back if you have to against any usurpation of power. The founding fathers believed this, and on down through American history, we have believed this. Anyone saying that when the government begins to abuse you and take away your rights, you're supposed to cower and just accept is wrong and is lying. It is what our country was founded on. I do not believe in murdering women, children, the innocent. But whatever political party you are on, if you feel a threat, or if your liberties are being threatened, then you and I should band together and fight against that government that threatens our freedoms. I have asked my liberal friends that if they fear Donald Trump becoming president again, and they fear that he would become a dictator, then why are they against the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and for the citizens to have military-grade weapons? Because what if Donald Trump becomes president and decides to be a dictator, hypothetically speaking, and begins to take away all the rights of every leftist, and begins shutting down their newspapers, and begins shutting down their news, and begins to pass laws to round them up, put them into concentration camps? Don't you think that the liberals would want to arm themselves and exercise their Second Amendment rights to fight against that tyranny? Unless they really don't believe that Trump would be a dictator. Unless they really are the ones that want to be on the side of putting political opponents in jail or in concentration camps. Perhaps they're the ones. I'm just throwing it out there, but perhaps they are the ones. That's why they want to take away your Second Amendment right. I have asked many of my Black American friends, and I've said, let's say hypothetically that Donald Trump is the racist that you guys say he is, and he comes in and says, oh, I'm going to take away your right to bear weapons and your right to vote and your right for this and your right for that. Don't you want to have weapons to defend against that tyranny? And I get a different response from them than from the liberals. And they said, yes, we do. And I think that's why a lot of Black Americans are more willing to keep the right to bear arms. And that's the whole point of the right to bear arms, is to protect ourselves against the tyranny together as Americans. And if a civil war needs to happen, then so be it. If it's the government against the citizens, then so be it. It happened in 1776. It happened in the 1860s, even though in that one I'm not on the side of the Confederates, but it happened, and they had a right, or they had a right to fight for what they believed in, what was right. They lost, but if you want to take up arms and try to fight and win, you're more than welcome to do so. You have to win, of course, but you have that right. That is why the Second Amendment is there. So this Hasan, back to him, he would have been a bootlicking Tory in the 1700s, praising the central government, denouncing the founding fathers. Just imagine, he probably sounds like some newspapers, the London Times of the 1750s and 1760s and 1770s, talking about those colonists over there causing violence, hanging effigies of George Washington or of King George III and calling for all the signers of the Declaration of Independence to be found and hung for treason. That's what he sounds like. Somebody who would have said back then, you know what, this George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, they're rabble-rousers, stirring up violence, stirring up arms against the government. These people don't believe in the founding of the country or the founding of the United States. Their sole purpose is to keep the Democrats in power and to choke the rest of us Americans from our rights of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and everything we hold dear. And when you do that, be prepared for resistance. People love Star Wars, and all these actors got on the resistance bandwagon, and yet none of them have weapons. The very movie Star Wars, in order to start a rebellion, they had to have military-grade weapons to fight against the military, the evil empire. That's when it makes you wonder whose liberties are really being threatened. How come these people call about, oh, there might be violence, yet they never arm themselves? Oh, Trump might be a dictator, yet they never arm themselves. But they want to take away your weapons. Think about that. I'm not calling for violence. I'm just showing you history and talking about history. And now I'm here to tell you that Hasan would have been a New York Times reporter back in the 1700s. We'll leave it at that. We'll see you later. Have a good night.